Jennifer Pan's 911 call was desperate. She sobbed for help, begged police to hurry, told the operator her parents had been shot, but the person making that call was the one who planned it all. On November 8, 2010, a 911 call in Markham, Ontario, shattered the quiet. A young woman's voice, trembling, said armed men had broken in, tied her to the staircase, and shot both parents. The dispatcher logged the call at 10:23 p.m. That desperate call would launch one of Canada's most meticulous investigations and ultimately prove her guilt. The 911 call lasted just over 4 minutes. Jennifer Pan's voice, frantic, described a nightmare. 3 men broke in, dragged her to the stairs, bound her with shoelaces, and demanded money. She heard her mother cry, then 2 shots. She begged the operator to send help. When officers arrived, they found the scene exactly as she'd described. Bichha Pan dead from a gunshot to the head, Han Pan barely alive with a bullet lodged in his face, and Jennifer still tied to the banister. But the scene whispered inconsistencies. No forced entry. The back door unlocked, but the screen door latched from inside. Valuables untouched. Jewelry, cash, electronics. And Jennifer's restraints, loose enough to slip off, her clothes smooth, her hair undisturbed. The chaos she described didn't match the order the house displayed. Detectives began to doubt what they were seeing. The next hour will follow a murder investigation that looks, at first, like a simple home invasion, a terrified daughter, a frantic 911 call. But the real story is the unraveling of Jennifer Pan, a young woman who spent years inside a web of lies, so intricate that when it finally collapsed, it took both her parents with it. We'll trace the detectives' path as they piece together inconsistencies, the untouched valuables, the fake college transcripts, the secret boyfriend, and the chilling communications that led to a murder-for-hire plot. And we'll ask the question at the dark heart of this tragedy: how does a child come to see her family as an obstacle to be removed? This is a story about status, control, and the lies we tell to protect ourselves from those who want the best for us. It forces us to confront the line between love and coercion, and what happens when that line is crossed. If you're following this investigation, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. By the end, you'll hear that 911 call with completely different ears. This case will change how you listen to emergency calls forever. To understand what happened inside that house, you have to understand the world that built it. The Pan family were Vietnamese refugees who fled after the war, arriving in Canada with nothing. Han Pan worked the night shift at an auto parts plant. Bichha Pan assembled jewelry components in a factory. Together, they saved enough to buy a 2-story brick home on Helen Avenue, the kind of place that announces, "We made it." Their sacrifice was absolute. Decades of uncomplaining labor, all to give Jennifer and Felix a life they'd never tasted. But that sacrifice came with unspoken expectations. They had 2 children, Jennifer and Felix, and poured every hope into them. Education was the family religion. Success, the only prayer. Jennifer was enrolled in piano at 4, figure skating at 6, and by high school, her parents expected a path to medical school. Jennifer felt those expectations like a vice. Expectations wielded like a blade can cut as much as they carve. Under the weight of that pressure, a quiet rebellion took root. She began seeing Daniel Wong, a relationship her parents forbade because they saw it as a threat to her future. What they didn't know was that the rebellion had already become a secret life, one Jennifer would protect for 8 years with an ever-expanding, elaborate architecture of lies. The first major disturbance in the investigation came just 3 days after the attack, in the form of a single devastating conversation. Han Pan had survived the shooting, but he was in critical condition, his face swollen beyond recognition, his jaw wired shut. For 72 hours, he drifted in and out of consciousness at a Toronto trauma center. When he finally woke enough to communicate, Detective Bill Cortis was at his bedside. Han couldn't speak, but he could write notes. And what he wrote changed everything. He told the detective that on the night of the attack, his daughter Jennifer had not been restrained the entire time. After the intruders tied her to the staircase, she got up and walked around the house. He said she spoke to one of the men, not as a hostage pleading, but calmly, familiarly, as if they knew each other. Before the shots were fired, Jennifer came over to him and asked a question. Then she turned to the gunman and said something that sounded like an instruction. The detective asked if Han recognized any of the intruders. He wrote, "No," but then he added something else. He said Jennifer had been acting strangely for weeks, distant, constantly on her phone, and he felt she was hiding something. The investigation, which had started as a search for 3 unknown assailants, now had a new and unsettling focal point: the victim herself. Criminologists call it the double life. It's a survival mechanism, a way of compartmentalizing a self that can't be shown to the people who matter most. For Jennifer Pan, that double life had been running for nearly a decade before the night of the 911 call. She was living with her parents on Helen Avenue, but existing in an entirely different reality. In 2004, when Jennifer was supposed to be starting her senior year of high school, she forged her report card and told her parents she had earned early acceptance to the University of Toronto's pharmacology program. She hadn't. She hadn't even graduated. She'd failed calculus, and her grades were so poor she didn't qualify for any university admission. But rather than face her parents' disappointment, she created a fiction. She bought textbooks, faked class schedules, and spent hours in the university library pretending to study. She kept this going for 4 years. When it came time to graduate, she forged a diploma. When her parents asked about medical school applications, she told them she was working as a pharmacy technician at a local hospital. She wasn't. She was a waitress, and she spent her nights with Daniel Wong, the boyfriend her parents had forbidden her to see. The lies had become so layered, so interdependent, that there was no way out. And that's the thing about a double life. It doesn't just hide the truth from others. It eventually hides the truth from yourself. By the fall of 2010, the walls were closing in. Jennifer's parents discovered she was still seeing Daniel and gave her an ultimatum: end the relationship or leave. Jennifer told them she'd broken up with him, but in reality, she and Daniel just went deeper underground. That's when the phone records start to tell a different story. In the weeks before the attack, Jennifer's cell phone lit up with messages to a man named Lenford Crawford. He'd been introduced through Daniel. Crawford had a criminal record and connections to people who could solve problems in ways most of us never imagine. The texts and calls grew more frequent. They discussed a plan. They discussed money, $50,000, paid after the job. They discussed the layout of the Pan home, the family's schedules, and how to make a violent robbery look random. And here's the moral dilemma this case forces us to confront. At what point does a victim of parental pressure become a perpetrator? Jennifer Pan was, by all accounts, a young woman crushed by expectations she could never meet. But the solution she chose wasn't to run away, or tell the truth, or seek help. She chose to arrange the murder of the people who made her feel like a failure. And if you're like me, you're wondering, could I have seen this coming? Could anyone? If you're following this investigation, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because we're about to go deeper into how this all unraveled. And yet, even as the evidence against Jennifer mounted, Details didn't fit. The investigation was no straight line. It was a mess of contradictions. For one thing, Jennifer herself had been shot at, or so she claimed. She had a small wound on her thigh. But the angle was strange, and forensic analysis later suggested it might have been self-inflicted. Then there were the neighbors. Several saw a dark-colored vehicle idling that evening, but their descriptions of the occupants varied wildly. One said 2 men, another said 3, another said she saw a woman. The police composite sketches looked nothing alike. And then there was the 911 call itself. If you listened to it without knowing the backstory, it sounded genuinely terrified. The dispatcher, a veteran named Teresa Lightfoot, later testified she had no doubt she was speaking to a traumatized victim. The voice was high and thin, the breathing ragged, the words tumbling out in a way that seemed impossible to fake. But here's what I've learned covering cases like this. The most convincing lies are told by people who've been lying so long they've forgotten where the truth begins. Jennifer Pan had spent 8 years performing a version of herself for her parents. The 911 call was just the final, most desperate performance. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: cell phone towers. Detectives mapped Jennifer's phone records against the timeline of that night. In the hours before the 911 call, her phone had been in constant contact with Lenford Crawford. Then they looked at location data. At 9:30 p.m., her phone pinged a tower near the house. At 9:45, it pinged again. At 10 o'clock, still in the area. At 10:05, 15 minutes before the call, a flurry of calls between Jennifer, Crawford, and a third number belonging to David Milvaganam. All 3 were in the same cell sector, within a few hundred meters of each other. The police theory was no longer a theory. It was a timeline. The intruders hadn't broken in. They'd been let in. Jennifer had opened the door and coordinated the attack from inside, while her parents slept. And then came the detail that shattered the home invasion narrative. The police examined the landline in the Pan house, the phone Jennifer said she was on when the intruders came upstairs. They found the cord had been cut, not yanked from the wall, not broken in a struggle, cut, cleanly, with a blade, and the cut had been made from inside, at a height and angle only someone in the room could have achieved. The scene was no longer arguing back, it was screaming. With that new evidence, the phone records, the cut cord, the detectives went back to the beginning. They re-examined the 911 call, not as evidence of a crime, but as a performance. And when you listen through that lens, the cracks start to show. Jennifer says she doesn't know where the intruders went, then corrects herself. They went out the back door. She says she's tied up and can't move, but then describes her parents' positions in detail. She says she heard 2 shots. Neighbors heard 3. She says the men demanded money, but nothing was taken. She says she was dragged downstairs, but no drag marks, no bruises. And then there's the moment that, in retrospect, is almost unbearable. The operator asks if anyone else might be hurt. Jennifer says, "My dad is still alive, but I think my mom is dead." She says it with a flatness, a resignation that doesn't match someone who just watched her mother die. It's the voice of someone who already knows the outcome because she helped write the script. The detectives also went back to the hospital interview from the night of the attack. They'd treated her as a victim then. Now they watched the tape and saw what they'd missed: the averted eyes, the small shifts in detail, the way she slipped into past tense when talking about her parents. The body language of deception was all over that interview, and they had been too focused on the horror to see it. By the spring of 2011, the investigation had narrowed to a single, shattering conclusion. Jennifer Pan, Lenford Crawford, David Milvaganam, and a 4th man named Eric Carty had conspired to kill Han and Bik Ha Pan in their own home. The motive was not robbery, it was liberation. Jennifer had come to believe that the only way to escape the prison of her parents' expectations was to remove them entirely. And the tragedy is that she almost succeeded. Her mother died at the scene. Her father was shot in the face and left for dead. But Han Pan survived, and his survival is the reason we know the truth today. The police built their case on 3 pillars: Han's testimony, the phone records, and the physical evidence that contradicted the home invasion story, the cut cord, the untouched valuables. They also found a series of text messages that were, in their way, more incriminating than any DNA or fingerprint. In the days after the attack, Jennifer texted Lenford Crawford, "I'm so scared. I can't believe this happened." And Crawford replied, "Don't worry, just stick to the story." That exchange, read in court, landed like a hammer blow. The trial began in 2014 and lasted 10 months. The jury heard the 911 call played repeatedly, until the words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The prosecution argued that Jennifer had not just opened the door to the killers, she had directed them, chosen the targets, and lied about it all with a coldness that defied comprehension. The prosecution played the 911 call one final time, but this time they didn't play it alone. They set it against the hospital security footage from just hours after the shooting. They laid it beside the text messages Jennifer had sent to Crawford, and they placed it alongside the testimony of her father, Han Pan, who sat in the courtroom in a wheelchair, his face still disfigured from the bullet that passed through his skull. Then the prosecutor asked the jury to do something no one in that room had ever done. Listen to the call, not as a victim's voice, but as the architect's. When you hear it that way, the call transforms. The words that once sounded like terror now ring like calculation. The sobs that seemed like grief become the panic of a performer watching her scene collapse. "I'm tied up," she says, but there's no struggle in her voice. "They shot my parents," she says, but she already knows it's done. The most chilling line comes near the end. The operator asks if she knows who did it. "No," Jennifer says, "I don't know." But by then, the jury knew. They knew she had spent months planning that night. They knew she had recruited the men who pulled the triggers. They knew she had let them into the house, walked them through the rooms, pointed out the targets. And they knew that after the shots, she had returned to her place on the staircase, looped the shoelaces around her wrists, and waited for the police, so she could play the part she had written for herself. The 911 call was not a cry for help. It was the final act of a deception that consumed 3 lives. 2 of them, literally. What makes this case so difficult to sit with is that it resists the easy narrative of a monster. Jennifer Pan was not a psychopath. The psychological evaluations found no mental illness, no history of violence, no evidence that she was incapable of empathy. And yet she did something that seems to require its complete absence. She looked at her parents, the people who fed her, clothed her, drove her to piano lessons, worried about her future, and she saw them as obstacles, not as people, as things to be removed. The psychiatrists at trial talked about something called the narcissism of the double life. When you spend years hiding who you really are, the hidden self becomes the real self. The person you show to the world becomes a costume. And when that costume starts to chafe, when the pressure of maintaining it becomes unbearable, the solution is not to take it off. The solution is to destroy the audience. That's what happened here. Jennifer didn't want to kill her parents because she hated them. She wanted to kill them because they were the only ones who could expose the lie. And that is a different kind of horror. It's not the horror of rage or revenge, or even greed. It's the horror of a young woman who had so thoroughly lost herself in the performance of being the perfect daughter that murder looked like the only exit. There was always another way. She could have told the truth. She could have run away. She could have asked for help, but the lies had been building for so long that the truth felt more dangerous than murder. So I want to ask you, what do you think pushed her over the edge? The fear of being exposed, or the sheer exhaustion of maintaining the lie? Let me know in the comments. In December 2014, the jury returned their verdict. Jennifer Pan, Lenford Crawford, David Milvaginam, and Eric Carty were all convicted on multiple counts: first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Jennifer received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years. She was 28 when the gavel fell. Her father, Han Pan, watched his daughter be led away in handcuffs. He had lost his wife. He had lost his daughter. He had lost the entire narrative of his family's success that had driven him across an ocean and through decades of sacrifice. In the years since, Han largely retreated from public life. He gave one interview, saying he still loved his daughter, couldn't understand what happened, and wished he could go back to the day before the attack and do something differently. Felix, Jennifer's brother, has stayed silent. He lost his mother and, in a different way, his sister. The Pan family's Canadian dream, pursued with such relentless focus, ended on Helen Avenue with gunfire and a daughter's voice on a 911 recording. The other men convicted filed appeals. Some succeeded on technical grounds, but the core findings stand. Jennifer organized the murder of her parents, not out of hatred, but out of a desperate belief it was her only way to be free. I keep coming back to that 911 call. The voice is young and scared, begging for help. But the terrible truth is that the help she's begging for is the police coming to save her from the consequences of her own actions. Not for Bitch Ha, who died on her kitchen floor. Not for Han, who carries the scars of that night. Not for Jennifer, serving a life sentence. The story of Jennifer Pan is about the stories we tell, to our parents, to ourselves. Those stories can overwrite reality so completely that the truth explodes, leaving no one intact. The lies we tell to protect ourselves are never as safe as we think. They compound, and they demand a price. If this story affected you, please subscribe and share. I'll be back next week with another hidden story.